Okay, hi everyone. Amber here. Today I am going to be showing you my process for creating a podcast episode and some tips for podcasts in general. I've had a number of scholars kind of ask me about this because they've expressed interest in maybe doing a short series in lieu of a conference or that sort of a thing, or even just starting your own podcasts altogether, which I highly encourage. I think scholarship could benefit from some faster turnaround time in discussions. But anyway, just as a disclaimer here, I'm not a pro, and so I'm happy to share my process and how I do things, but I by no means am claiming to be an expert. I bet there are simpler ways of doing this. Um, I just very much have bootstrapped this myself and am figuring things out as I go along. I actually don't listen to podcasts myself. And so I'm kind of perhaps the blind leading the blind here, but hopefully it's helpful to someone. Um, all right, so let's get started here. So first of all, for actually recording the podcasts themselves, there's a number of different ways you can do it. If you can record in person, that's ideal because your audio quality will be higher and you're not at the hands of um, bandwidth provision for the day and ensuring these good internet connections. So for the podcasts that I have been able to record in person, I started out just using these $20 lapel mics that I got off of Amazon, and they actually work very well. I was intimidated by trying to find exactly the right microphones and things, but the reality is that you can jump in with some cheap or virtually no technology. I mean, relatively speaking, and be just fine. So I had these $20 lapel mics. I plugged them into my cell phone and I used the pre-installed voice recorder app on my Android cell phone, and that actually did quite well. I continue to use that when I can be with people in person. And then for the actual recordings afar, that gets a little bit trickier. So right now for this recording, I'm using a Yeti Nano microphone, Yeti Nano Blue microphone, which was about $80, which was exciting for me. That was an investment because otherwise I've been trying to keep it pretty cheap. And it's a decent microphone. You can kind of see what the quality is just by listening to this video. In the past, I've used a bunch of different things that I've tried out. I've tried a couple of like $30 headsets. I haven't had much luck with the quality on those. And in fact, in the podcast we'll be editing, I was using one of those like $20 to $30 headsets. And so hopefully you'll be able to tell the audio difference. But again, I encourage you not to get too caught up in what equipment you're using because most of the time it's not going to matter and your audio will be all right, especially if you're going through the process of editing it in any way. Okay, so when I do record podcasts from afar, I use Zoom. That's what I have pulled up here, zoom.us. Zoom is basically like Skype, but it allows for recording in the cloud. And so you get sort of a better voice quality from yourself and from your guest when you do it this way. I also like Zoom because it doesn't require that your guest has Zoom pre-installed. So like with Skype, they have to have Skype, they have to have an account or it won't work. Zoom, they can just click a link from an email and press a couple of buttons and be in to your meeting just for the temporary meeting. And so I really like that. That's a big advantage. I also just encourage Zoom because it's a versatile tool. So right now I'm recording the screencast in Zoom, which is fantastic because usually screencasting kind of software costs a lot of money, but this is totally free and you're able to just sort of have these instructional videos that you can create one-offs of by having a meeting with yourself like I am right now. So anyway, this is it. This is what I use. You do have to sign up if you're going to be receiving recordings after the fact. So what Zoom will do is you have this option to click record. I can't show you because it's hiding itself from you in this recording, but it's pretty straightforward. It has an option to click record. You can record just the audio, which is what I usually do to conserve bandwidth, or you can record video as well. And then let's see, when you exit the meeting, it will create a folder, which I'm pulling up here, the folder in my laptop. You can see that it spits out a folder for each one of your recordings that you've had, and it will just automatically render that once you exit the meeting and spit it into its new file. So today I'm working with Brad Coaklett's second podcast with me, actually. Thank you, Brad. Brad, thanks also for being a guinea pig here and agreeing to let me do this instructional how-to with your audio. So it will spit out your audio and video files into this folder. I'm just working with the audio file. If you were working with the video file, it would be the MP4. So I take this and I use Audacity for my audio editing software because it's also free and it's fairly straightforward to use. There are some quirks, but you get used to it. So the one trouble with this is that Audacity does not accept M4A files. A lot of audio software, editing software doesn't accept M4A files. So I have to actually convert this file. And to do that, I use the online audio converter. It allows you to do it for free. And let me just reload this page to show you what it looks like up front. So here you go. So I ordinarily just drag and drop this file here, and it will upload the file, and then you can choose which kind of an output you want it to convert to. I'm going to stick with MP3 because it's a smaller file size, and I want the podcast host that I use has a cap on how large the audio file can be, and so MP3 is better for me. If you're wanting a higher quality recording, a WAV file is probably better for you. So I drag and drop, it uploads, I keep it on MP3, but I do ramp it up to the best quality, and then I click convert. It'll take a few minutes to convert, and then it'll give you a big button that says download. You click download, and you can see the ones that I've already done today. They were giving me grief, so I don't dare try it again while we're recording, so it doesn't freeze up the thing, but you'll have the option to download. So you can see I've downloaded the main file of the recording of the conversation, and then this is just a separate introduction file. So now I'm going to move over to Audacity. So here's Audacity, and I have a file here that, let me zoom out and show you. This is what it looks like. So you can see this little blip over here is the exiting music and outro, and then here's the intro music and the introduction to the overall podcast, not the guest. So that's what's going on here. And so what you're seeing right now is kind of a skeleton file that I've created over time, but I'll show you kind of how it works. So this piece up here is the introduction where I say, you're listening to the Moral Science Podcast, and we generally talk about blah, blah, blah. This part that I just highlighted in white here, this is the actual music that I use for the introduction. So I'm going to click play. You can hear it. And here.
Human favorite subject, the scientific study of human morality.
Okay, so that gives you kind of an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. So now I'm going to drag and drop these files in here to load into my project, my editing project. So this will take a couple minutes. I'm going to pause so we don't waste your time, and then I'll be back once it's loaded. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for both this main conversational file as well as the introduction file. Okay, I'm back now. So you can see that I added this file track of our conversation, and then this little thing is actually the introduction for him. So we're going to start with the introduction, and because it's hard to see what's going on with so many different tracks next to each other, I'm going to minimize some of these ones that make it a little bit easier for us to see what's going on. Really, the two that we're working with at first are going to be aligning the introduction and getting it in place relative to the music. Okay, so, and I'm also going to, you know what, this one's fine, but I'm going to mute everything else so that we can just hear the pieces that we're working with. All right, actually mute that for temporarily. So here's what that introduction sounds like.
This is the Moral Science Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr.
Brad. I did that wrong. I don't know why this one is not letting me play with it. All right, because it's being kind of quirky, I'm gonna go ahead and, so I clicked to highlight, went back to the beginning. Now I'm gonna click Control X to cut it and then paste my cursor over here, which is where I want ultimately the introduction to kind of take place. So now let's listen to it again without the other introduction overlapping.
Dr. Bradford Coaklett is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Kansas. His work focuses on Eastern philosophy, the philosophy of religion, and applied.
Okay, so this is what I want. It sounds a little bit hollow, but this stuff is just me like clacking away, finding my place. So I'm gonna highlight that and then click delete, and I'll move it over. There I'm just zooming into the timeline to make it larger so I can see what I'm working with a little bit better. And then I like to do a little bit of audio correction. It just helps the sound seem nicer, so you can kind of get rid of background noises in your file. So you can kind of hear like a light buzz there. In general, when you're recording, it is nice to leave some dead time in the air so you can get a sense for the background noise of the room, especially if you're recording in person, and then remove that. So I highlight this section that's just the background noise, go to Effect, and then Noise Reduction, and click Get Noise Profile. So now what it's doing is it's just analyzing what the background noise sounds like. And then I'm going to highlight this whole thing and say, all right, go back to Effect, click Noise Reduction again. And then this time I'm going to leave these settings. This is the default and I've had good luck with them. So noise reduction at 12, sensitivity at 6, and frequency at 3, and click OK. And what it's doing now is it's trying to strip that background noise out of the audio. So now the very beginning, you should hear less of a buzz.
Dr. Bradford Coaklett is an assistant professor.
Yep. Okay, so now I'm going to clip off this dead end. Okay, and I'm going to unmute the music now because now is the fun part where I get to try to align the music all together. So I'm highlighting Control X to cut, and I'm going to move it back a bit because I want it to come in sooner relative to the music. Let's delete that. Okay, so let's hear what it sounds like.
Dr. Bradford Coaklett is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University.
Okay, so not too shabby, but I want to kind of soften that a bit. And so one thing that I can do is I want to do a fade, really. So I go up here to this sort of, almost looks like an hourglass symbol, and I grab that. You can see now up here from the music how I've faded it, those purple lines kind of coming into place and outlining like the height of the file. That sort of represents the audio and where it comes in. So I'm going to go in here and click at the beginning and click it somewhere else. I'm going to now click here again and kind of drag it down. And you can see that white space in the middle is getting smaller as I go down and larger as I go up. That sort of represents like the volume. So I'm going to go down a little bit, just soften it so it has more of a fade in as the music is fading out to get rid of the abruptness. I'm going to go back up and click the selection tool cursor again to exit that so we can listen in.
Dr. Bradford Coaklett is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Kansas. His work focuses on Eastern philosophy, the philosophy.
Okay, So not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone, although I do want to know how loud that is relative to my other intro. I don't like it when one section is really loud and the other is quiet. So let's see how they compare.
Researchers' moral biases, cultural values, ethics. In this podcast,
okay, so I think that this one is significantly louder. I think the piece we just added in is significantly louder. So I am going to actually quiet the whole thing down a bit by going back to that section. I'm going to drag this in a bit more. I'm going to drag this down to make it a little quieter. And let's leave that there for now until, so I'm going back to selection. Let's compare audio again.
Plus the obligatory trolley dilemma. In this podcast,
no, it's still loud. Let's do.
Dr. Bradford Coaklet is an assistant professor of philosophy at the
Okay, that seems better to me. So now the trick is to pull this music back, because right now, since this introduction was so short, it just...
how they contrast with Western ethical traditions.
The music just continues to be quiet, and as the cursor approaches this, it'll get louder again. So I really just need to shift this whole section over a bit. Okay, but since we're working with an audio file, I can't just cut and paste because it'll make the actual audio sound funny. So we're going to get more practice with this volume piece. So I'm going to move all of these volume kind of joints backwards and just readjust my volume. Okay, I don't know why there are so many of these. Must have been from a different project. All right, so now maybe something like that. You can see I'm just trying to get it to fade to be louder, right? Let's try this. Okay, so let's hear how it sounds now.
Eastern ethical traditions, how they compare with one another, and how they contrast with Western ethical traditions.
Okay, I think that sounds pretty good. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and minimize that section and maximize this section if it would let me. All right, I'm going to save this audio file. I'm going to pause for a second to restart this and see it's getting kind of buggy and not maximizing where we need to. Okay, I'm back. It took a little bit of finagling and I had to reload the file, but here is that main conversational file with Brad. But again, it's in the wrong place relative to the music. So now we want to move this whole file over so that it's starting where our music is fading out. Zooming into the file a little bit further so I can see better. Okay, so here I'm going to click to highlight the whole track, Control X to clip it, and I'm going to say we want it to start right around here relative to this music fade. And I am going to mute the music temporarily so we can check if we need normalization or audio adjustments on this. So let's see.
Hi, everyone. I am here with Brad Coaklet again for round two. Last time we talked.
Okay, so you can hear probably now the difference between the cheap headset microphone and the one I'm on currently. And we can try to adjust for that to make it a little bit clearer. So I'm going to delete this dead space. delete a little bit more dead space. I'm going to turn the music back on and just listen to how everything flows from the end of my introduction of him to the beginning of the podcast conversation.
How they compare with one another and how they contrast with Western ethical traditions.
Hi, everyone. I am here with Brad Coaklet again for round 2.
Okay, so not too bad. First thing I notice is I want this fade to happen faster. So let's test that again.
Hi, everyone. I am here with Brad Coaklet again for round 2. Last time we talked about comparing ethics of the East and West, and I kind of got us off of track.
Okay, not too bad. I do notice right away, though, that this voice...
The judgment-action gap, character development.
Finish discussing Eastern...
And then
Or
voice
often I like to start...
are all three different are all three different loudness levels, which I don't like. That bugs me. So let's go ahead and take our nifty volume maximizer. So if you're trying to increase the volume, you actually want to grab this white portion and increase like that.
Or often I like to start the podcast by hearing about...
Okay, so there's the loudness. Now,
Or often I like to start the podcast by hearing about researchers' backgrounds, but you're just...
Okay. It didn't seem fuzzy to me. Often when I'm using Zoom for the conversations, I don't need to normalize the audio tracks after. That usually just happens when I'm recording in person. Now with Brad, I think we just had a pretty straightforward conversation and I don't need to edit in the middle. So I'm going to roll with that assumption for now. But I do need, obviously this conversation was a lot longer than some of the others. So I'm going to need to move the outro piece so that it aligns with the end. But first, let's just make sure that I stopped recording in the right place.
Give me a lot to think about, so thanks so much.
Thanks. Well, me too. I've definitely learned about a whole nother thing I have to go read in psychology, which is always fun. So thanks. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, so it looks like we ended right there, and this is just going to be dead audio. So I'm going to highlight, delete to get rid of that. Now I'm scrolling out so I can see more space on my screen timeline-wise. And so now I'm going to highlight these two sections. And so I'm clicking down, I'm holding it, and that highlights it. But I also need to go down to the bottom to capture not just the music up here, but also the outro down here, which is also, it looks like, going to give me some grief. Okay, so now I'm going to Control X to grab that and try to align it. My best guess about where it should be is here. And I need to get both rows. If you don't highlight down to both rows, it just won't paste that second outro file, the one that was in this lower level. So you need to make sure to highlight both rows. So Control X to cut and now Control V to paste. And we can listen to how this sounds.
Anyway, you've given me a lot to think about, so thanks so much.
Thanks. Well, me too. I've definitely learned about a whole nother thing I have to go read in psychology, which is always fun. So thanks. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, that was coming in too late. Oops. Undo that. Okay, now I'm gonna highlight again. That looks more reasonable. Okay, let's try this.
Confucianism and...
Oh, never mind, I gotta undo it because again, I didn't highlight that bottom row. I always forget to. Ah. Okay, so let's try it again.
And start to implement that more into my thinking. So anyway, you've given me a lot to think about. So thanks so much.
Thanks. Well, me too. I've definitely learned about a whole nother thing I have to go read in psychology, which is always fun. So thanks. And always good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, now since that audio file is actually quite a bit quieter than the other ones, I don't feel I need to add any fade-ins or fade-outs on that like I did on this intro. I am gonna scroll back into this. Man, Audacity is usually not this buggy. It's giving me grief because it knows that. It knows I'm trying to show you how to do things. Okay, let me pause and see if I can fix this again. All right, while this was paused, I discovered something about this glitch when it's not expanding, which is that you can apparently just kind of click and drag like a window and that'll do the trick. So now we're back in business. Okay, so I wanted to, oh yes, the main thing was that I need to unmute this outro. So when you're about to go and render out a file, you need to make sure that everything is muted or unmuted the way you want it to appear, or else you'll run into problems. Like it just, if we had left this on mute and you see it faded out, it just wouldn't include that in the outputted audio file. So I'm going to unmute and check that everything is unmuted. Okay, so let's just double check the intro. Okay, good. So that's not muted, not muted, not muted, not muted, not muted. Okay, so we're going to go ahead now. You go to File and Export. I'm going to export it as an MP3 file. Again, because of the file size difference. If you're wanting to retain really high audio quality, you want to do things as a wave until the last second, and then you can downgrade to an MP3 if you're running into file size difficulties. But I'm going to export as an MP3. Save. Okay. All right. So while that is rendering out, I'm going to show you. This is the podcast host that I use. And the reason I use them is A, because they're free, which you're probably gathering I'm a fan of since I bootstrapped this whole thing. And B, because they'll manage your RSS, your code for you. So the RSS feed is what allows people to subscribe and to be a part of the series. So it's kind of it's the piece that makes a podcast subscribable. And that RSS feed can be hosted on a bunch of different podcast platforms. And Anchor, it's anchor.fm, they will allow you to they'll manage that for you. So all you really need to do is upload your episode, add in the episode description, that sort of a thing. And I'll show you that here in a minute once I have the file exported. But they'll automatically create that feed and send it out to a bunch of different platforms. And that's great. So that's why the Moral Science Podcast is available on a bunch of different platforms, all the major ones, and then some. So Spotify, you can find on Spotify, Apple, Google, like Stitcher, a few different things. And so I really enjoy that about Anchor, that it takes care of that for you. That process does take initially a few weeks, especially for Apple, before your podcast will be available there, but it will happen. And Anchor just sort of does that under the hood and makes it really easy. So I recommend using them for both cost and just practicality purposes. Let's check on our exporting. Okay, we still got a couple of minutes here. Let me show you a couple of other things here. So in Anchor, when you're creating a podcast, you always want to include podcast cover art, and most places will require that. Like iTunes will require that you have cover art before your podcast is allowed to be included on their listings. And so one way you can do that, these are the tools that I use. So Pixabay is a royalty-free image thing. And so you can grab images that serve as a background. So for instance, I don't know, let's just say pixel art. You can search for whatever, and like you can see, okay, well this photo might be good for me to have as the background to my podcast, and then you can just layer text on top or that sort of a thing. And what's great is you can see over here that it's free for commercial use and no attribution is required, which is nice because you can get something looking pretty professional without having to pay royalties to actually access it, and you can download it for free. If you get the super high quality one, I think you might have to have an account, which I do have one. I've never been spammed by them in my email, so it's something to consider. And then from here, you can take whatever artwork you want, and I use Photopea as sort of my free online Adobe Illustrator type thing. So I made my podcast artwork from a combination of Pixabay and Photopea. I took a background from Pixabay and then I layered text on top of that, and I think like vector art on top of that as well. So it wasn't that difficult. Everything came from these two pieces, and I'm by no means a graphic artist, and I think it looks all right. So that's good. As far as the music goes too, I haven't mentioned yet, but the intro and outro music, or at least I don't think I've mentioned it, the intro and outro music for my podcast I got at Free Music Archive. Again, this is like a royalty-free music thing. You can search by styles of music and this sort of thing. Let's click and search. It's been a while since I've used it, but I don't know. You could like funk, piano. I'm not sure how genres and search. Let's see, instrumental I think is good for podcasts, and then just like you can search through and find what you want to use. You have to look at each license on here because they're all slightly different. Some of them require that you give credit to the artist, which is why the song that I'm using, I always in my outro say, hey, this is a song created by this person. You can find it here. But it's nice because you can't just slap any old song into your podcast. So if you're not willing to pay royalties and you're not a musician, like I'm not a musician, then this is a good place to go and find your music for the podcast. Let's check on this again. All right, we are almost done. Okay, so I'm going to go pull up where that came from, and then I'll show you what it looks like to upload an episode in Anchor. Okay, so here's that episode. Brad Coaklet, we're going to do 2 though because we already have one for him from his first recording with me. Okay, so here's our episode. Make sure it's named accordingly. The name of the file when you upload it into the podcast host is going to be stuck. So anybody in all the world can come across that audio file name when they download it. So just make sure it's something that you feel good about. So I'm going to click in. Let me show you. Here's what Anchor looks like inside of the dashboard. So once you open an account, you can click on episodes and then click create new episode. So I just clicked create new episode, and here we are. They actually allow you to record right into their browser and to like add transitions and things. I've never tried that. It might be worth it, but I think it's I think there's a short time limit on how long it can be. And I think, and you can't have two people and so forth. So I've never really messed with it, but that is an option. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop our episode here to let that upload. And this is going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to pause again for you while it's uploading. Actually, really quickly before I pause, I'm going to go ahead and pull up. This is the order I naturally do things in, because you can see there's a lot of waiting time in this process. So for transcriptions, the cheapest, I like to do transcriptions because it helps with your search engine optimization, and it's just nice to have. I've had a few people mention, hey, I used to take notes on your podcast, and when I found out there were transcriptions, I was so relieved. It was great. So I do this, but transcriptions can get really expensive. This Temi system is the cheapest I've been able to find. It's about 10 cents per minute. And so even though I love being super frugal about things, I do use their system, and it winds up being like $6 to $7 per episode for about an hour and a little bit over. And so you just click, okay, do a new order. I have to upload the file here too. So go ahead and do that. But this system has a few advantages, which I'll show you in a little bit once these things stop uploading. So I'll go ahead and pause now and show you how to check out when it's time. All right, so you can see that it's finished uploading, and it automatically says, okay, the file was 71 minutes. It's going to be $7.10. So yeah, 10 cents a minute. And then you just click checkout and go. And when it's done creating the transcript, the automated transcript of your file, it'll email you and say so. For a file of this length, it usually takes like 10 minutes. It's not too bad. And then you can return, well, I'll pay for this, and then I'll return back to it and show you how it works. Okay, so you can see now that this order is processing, and we'll switch back there once it's done doing that. So let's go back to Anchor. This is where, remember, we were uploading the podcast episode, and so this first step is finally done. You can kind of test it, make sure it's all there.
Dr. Bradford Coaklett is an assistant professor of philosophy at the
And philosophy, starting
compare with one another and how they contrast with Western ethical traditions.
From more film. Thanks. We'll need to.
Questions, comments, suggestions, or requests.
Seems like it's all there, so I'm going to click Save Episode. And then this is where we can add in our title and our description. So let's see, I'm going to paste in a quick description. And then I'm going to name this episode Ethics of the East Part 2 with Bradford Coaklett. Season 1, episode 23. Now I'm going to schedule this for a consistent time. So I try to release every Tuesday at 12 a.m. Just to keep things consistent. And then I can go back and add more things here. Just in the descriptions, one thing to keep in mind is that you can link to things, like right here, this links to his to Brad's faculty page. The only issue is that you shouldn't rely just on that for the you shouldn't rely just on the links there. If you have a really important link, you actually want to spell out the URL, because certain podcast platforms like Apple, I'm thinking of specifically, I think it's Apple, won't like they don't allow for links in a podcast description. And so your listeners simply won't see that there's a link there. And so if it's important to have the link, make sure you actually have the URL in text form so they could copy and paste that somewhere else. So I'm going to click schedule episode. So it knows, okay, I don't release it yet, but release it in the future. And it says, okay, it's going to be released on this day at this time. All right, so that's how you generally do this. That's it on that end. I'm still waiting on the transcript to finish here, so I'll pause and resume once that's ready to go. All right, so we're back. It's finished processing, so now we can go to our episode and click View Transcript. And what I like about Temi so much is that even though it's not perfect, they usually do a pretty decent job about getting a good transcript that's done automatically. And then what's more awesome is that you can actually go through and check the transcript without too much trouble. And so I use the transcript as my process for reviewing to make sure there were no quirks in the audio file. And so I can listen to it all the way through while checking the transcript and make sure there aren't any double outros, which has happened before, that sort of thing. And I'll be able to catch it in this process. That way I make sure I'm actually listening to the full episode before it's released in the wild, but I don't have to listen through it twice, once while editing and then again with like reading through a transcript separately. So it's nice because you can edit in line. So here you can edit the speaker. Okay, this was me introducing. So we're going to say this was Amber. And it does a pretty good job about picking up on who is who. So I'm going to change all speaker ones to Amber. And then it'll also highlight in red words it wasn't sure about, or like you see this one says inaudible if it had a hard time picking up on the word at all. But we can click play.
This is the Moral Science Podcast, and I'm your host, Amber Cazzell. In this series, I get to interview experts in my favorite subject, the scientific study of human morality, virtues and vices.
So I actually don't include the introductory stuff in the podcast since it's already in the description. So I'm going to skip down to where I actually start to care about whether or not the transcript is looking good, which would be here.
Hi, everyone. I am here with Brad Copeland again for round 2. Last time we talked about comparing ethics of the East and West, and I kind of got us off of track, and we never...
So you can kind of see, I mean, I'm not going to do this whole thing obviously right now, but you can get a sense of how it'll help you pick up on things. I'm not perfect at this. I'm not a perfectionist at it, but I try to at least check on people's names because that's when things get a little wonky. And it also tends to be the times when listeners want to go back and be able to find a reference. And so I try to keep up with name corrections. So you can see, okay, I had it changed to Amber. It's picking up automatically on when the speaker changes. So you'll see it says speaker 2, and that's probably where
with Eastern ethics.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me back, Amber. It's fun to keep talking. So the thing about Kohlberg that I was mentioning to you, one thing is that really interesting is, so Lawrence Kohlberg is this influential, I guess, sort of founder of moral psychology. In psychology, he also published in top philosophy journals, like Journal of Philosophy.
Okay, so you can see how it'll go. Usually I'll just kind of leave these things alone. And you can be as picky or not picky as you want to on this, obviously. Some of you won't do any transcripts at all. That's fine. And for those of you who are like me, I'm definitely a 2Xer, so you can speed it up, how to go fast.
And Kant influenced philosophers like John Rawls, who I think Kohlberg was hanging out with, or at least
speeds up the process as you're checking on your
in philosophy, after Kohlberg created his psychological theory of moral.
So once this is done, the one last thing I'll leave you off on is a website for it. Usually if you have a transcript, that means you have a website for it too. So I bought the domain name moralsciencepodcast.com. That's what I use. What we're looking at here is actually just a Wix website, a personal Wix website. It was expensive, which isn't good, but I wanted to have a place to put all of the transcripts. I think it was like $150 for a year. If you want to get rid of ads, if you don't care about ads, you can do it for free. And then they just have a big banner saying, hey, this was created with Wix. So it also took me a long time to figure out how to have an episode page, because a lot of these website creation things like Wix and WordPress, they'll have a format for a podcast, but they won't allow you to actually have like episode transcripts in there. It's just really short, especially in Wix. So what this is actually a blog page in their system. And I'm actually going to go down to Brad's old one here. So it took me a while to figure out how to do this all, but you can embed into the page once the podcast is released. Let's go to so this is like the public facing Anchor web page. And you can click on share on any of these and then get the embed link. So you would grab it from there and embed it into your file here. So once I get that TEMI file, once I go through that all the way on the transcript, I paste it down below and just kind of give a warning like, hey, this isn't a great transcript. Put the episode description. This is what it looks like on this side. So I'm going to show you in the background what's going on my side of things. So if I go to Wix, here's my website. I click on that. And then I click on blog. So it's actually a blog page. And then I can create a new post and add in the description and so forth. But really quickly, I'll just show you how you embed. So you go there, do this, and then you would just paste the embed code and it'll automatically pop up. Again, depending on what kind of a platform you're using, there's a lot of different options to make sure that the SEO looks the way you want, the actual setup looks the way you want. But anyway, Wix is what I've been using for the Moral Science Podcast page, and you might have to finagle around and have it on your website as a blog like I do, rather than having it on your website as a podcast. So that's it. I hope that this has been helpful. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll try to reply, or you can email me. I'll try to reply. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.